Yo Joes and Janes, welcome to another Patreon exclusive. This week we're going to be taking a look at the original G.I. Joe Field Commander, Colonel Hawk at this point. He would become a general later on, but in the first year of G.I. Joe, he was a colonel, and he included the M.M.S. mobile missile system. So the M.M.S. was a towable armament, which I have hooked up to the Wolverine here, and as you can see, the Wolverine doesn't exactly have one of the best hooks on it for towing, but if we can get it on there, it is a towable armament. It doesn't back up very well, probably because G.I. Joe never gives up. They stay till the fight one. They don't retreat like Cobra. So it is cool that this is a towable armament. I always thought it was kind of strange that the leader, the original leader of G.I. Joe, didn't come with a vehicle. He came with something that got towed by the other vehicles. It was an odd choice in my opinion. And to talk about Hawk for a moment, I didn't even know this guy was the leader of G.I. Joe when the line first came out. I was a little kid. I didn't really understand the chain of command. They seemed all equal to me. And I thought Hawk was basically the exact same level as Grand Slam. He came with a towable weapon. Grand Slam came with the HAL laser. And I didn't read Hawk's file card. I didn't have this toy as a kid. So I never really took the time to read his file card. I didn't understand the rankings at the time. I didn't realize he was a colonel. He was ranked higher than all the other Joes. So I just thought he was another Joe, just like Grand Slam or Steeler, a weapons operator. It wasn't until years later, when General Hawk was released, that I started to put two and two together. Now the original Hawk figure is blonde, and another reason why I never bothered to get this set was because I had short fuse, and in the box through the bubble I could see the Hawk figure, and he looked far too much like short fuse to me. All of the first year Joes reused a lot of parts, and they even reused their heads with slight recolors. And to give you a quick comparison, here is short fuse. They even had similar helmets with the visors, and we pull off Shorty's helmet here. It's the same head, and it's, I always thought it was similar, but that actually looks exactly the same now that I take a closer look at it. I always imagined one of them was lighter blonde than the other, but it looks exactly the same to me. Short Fuse's eyebrows might be a little bit darker, but there was a variance in the browns on a lot of the figures, so that might not be even intentional. But they look the same to me, and that's a major reason why I never felt like I needed to get Hawk. He really seemed redundant. If his hair had been brown, if he had been given, well, there wasn't much variety in the heads, but something a little more stern looking, I might have tried to get him. But the silver on his body wasn't really enough to make me want to get this figure. Years later, this guy would show up on the pegs at my local Toys R Us, and I would go, who the heck is this guy? Who's this General Hawk who's suddenly the leader of G.I. Joe? Duke had been the leader in 1984 when he was released on card, and then in 1985, a big year for G.I. Joe with a whole bunch of new figures released. A new Authority figure was released in Flint, but he was still underneath Duke in the chain of command. Duke was the leader, and I thought, who is this guy? How can you do this? It was similar to Transformers, where Rodimus Prime came in, and all of a sudden he's the leader of the Autobots. In that situation, the previous leader passed away, so someone else rose through the ranks and took over, took the mantle, and it was passed to him. This guy right here it took me a little bit to warm up to him. I didn't like the fact that all of a sudden Duke was second in command to this guy. And I didn't put two and two together that General Hawk was originally Colonel Hawk. This guy was so forgettable to me in the first year that, much like Grand Slam, like I said, he was never featured in the cartoon, which is what I mainly went by. I didn't read too many G.I. Joe comics back then. And in the comic books, Hawk is the leader. He's got a crew cut, and he is clearly Larry Hama's favorite authority figure for G.I. Joe. Duke is occasionally used, but it almost seemed to me like Larry Hama was being asked to feature Duke. He seemed way too similar to Hawk in the comics, and was used sparingly, whereas this guy was the main guy. So I always thought it was strange that the original Hawk was blonde and the general version was brown-haired. Hama refused to go along with it apparently in the comics, and he just kept Hawk blonde in the comics. I guess in my own headcanon, General Hawk dyes his hair brown. He's maybe up there in years and he's getting grays, and for some reason he's dyeing his hair brown. I don't know, maybe he thinks it goes with his jacket more. But it was odd. I know they did it, the executives at Hasbro did it to differentiate him from Duke, so that that confusion that we're seeing, that we saw in the Marvel comic, wouldn't happen. That you're replacing one crew-cut blonde leader of G.I. Joe with another crew-cut blonde leader of G.I. Joe. So I understand why they did it. I always thought it was kind of strange though. And even though I love the G.I. Joe comics by Larry Hama, the hair thing does kind of bug me. Since I grew up on the cartoon, Hawk will always be a brunette to me. And so I decided to fix that. I was able to get an extra Hawk figure, and I used the head of a Sky Striker figure. So not Ace, the pilot of the Sky Striker, but there was a Tiger Force figure released with a G.I. Joe Tiger Force Rattler, and the figure released was named Sky Striker. I guess that was at the point where they were reusing trademarks so that they wouldn't lose them, if you know anything about how trademarks work. And I always thought that the head of Thunder, who came with the Slugger, looked the most like the 1986 General Hawk. And this head was originally a red head with the Slugger, but they repainted it for that Tiger Force Sky Striker figure. And because the heads are different from the 82, 83 figures and the 86 figures, which implemented the ball joint, these original ones just moved side to side. I was trying to find a side-to-side head from one of the first few years, 1982 to 1984, that would fit on this Hawk body, and I decided, well, this one looks a lot like him. He's a little older looking than this Colonel Hawk. He's a brunette. I think this looks like a younger version of this. So that is the Hawk that I like to display with my original lineup of Joes. It seems like more of a realistic progression from this to this than this fresh-faced, kind of not as intense looking, short fuse looking guy. I don't know, what do you think? You be the judge. And since I'm such a big fan of the file cards of these figures, they had so much personality thanks to Larry Hama. Let's take a look at the file card for Missile Commander Hawk. File name is Clayton Abernathy. Primary specialty is artillery. Secondary military specialty radar. He's from Denver, Colorado. His grade is 06, which as a kid meant nothing to me. I may have looked at the box as a kid in the toy store, seen the primary military specialty being artillery. Secondary is radar. The bio says, Hawk comes from a well-established in other words, real loaded. Family, he's a West Point graduate, top of class, and has seen action in a number of trouble spots. Graduated, advanced infantry training, covert ops school, served on CADRA, or however you pronounce that, North Atlantic Range Command, and USA ENGCOM EVR missile and radar training, classified. Qualified expert M16 M19 11A1 auto pistol. Quote says, he is keenly intelligent and perceptive and quite capable of totally selfless acts in support of his teammates. An excellent leader. Now, that wasn't enough to clue me in as a kid that this guy is the leader. Going back to the primary military specialty being artillery. That last little blurb there, if I had read that as a kid, I wouldn't have thought, well, that means he's the leader of G.I. Joe. I just thought they're all excellent leaders. They're all very confident, capable soldiers. So nothing about this file card to me indicated that this guy was the leader of G.I. Joe. I was used to something like Optimus Prime's tech specs, which said Autobot Commander, or Megatron's box, which said Decepticon Commander or Decepticon Leader. If they really meant for this guy to be the actual figurehead of G.I. Joe, they could have just easily put G.I. Joe Commander, like they eventually did on the General Hawk figure. Hence my confusion as a kid. This is a 1983 edition of Hawk, which features swivel arm battle grip, so you can actually position him to hold rifles, or patiently put his hands together while he's waiting. The original versions did not have this swivel, so the arms could just go forward and back like that. But that's Hawk. He's got the same body parts as a lot of the first year Joes. Black boots, silver accents, helmet with a visor. There we go. Blast shield to guard against this thing. The cool thing about the mobile missile system is that in addition to being a towable weapon, it could actually transform. It had moving parts so that you could make it more secure while it's sitting on the ground. So here is one of the other towable weapon systems. It's 1983's Whirlwind, and this is basically it. You hook it up to a vehicle and it gets pulled, and when you unhook the trailer, that's it. Like a lot of the towable weapons, it just kind of sits there. Whereas the M.M.S. has these moving parts, and you got to make the Transformers sound, obviously, whenever you're changing any Hasbro toy. You've got these feet that come out like this. In the back, this piece pulls out. That'll be used with the console, computer console, which Hawk operates. And then this right here has some feet that come out. And the M.M.S. now is elevated. It's not just sitting on its wheels. The power that these missiles have when they fire off would be tremendous, so it wouldn't be very wise for this missile system to just be on wheels. It would roll. So it's a nice little attention to detail to elevate it up on these stands. So that's the first part of the transformation. The second part is this console actually is really nicely stored in here behind the trailer hitch. So it can be pulled out and either be carried. This Hawk has incredibly small hands here, small grip. But yeah, that's very tight. I don't really want to risk breaking that. The thumbs on these guys, the older guys, are notorious for breaking, but you can have him carry this like a case, but what it's actually intended for is this stand that we pulled out of the back of the M.M.S. actually fits in here. You can fit it in there, wedge it in there, and there is this cable, which this is really nice. Some of the Joe and Transformers vehicles came with like the rubber hose for Optimus Prime's trailer, which over time breaks down, cracks, snaps apart. No matter how well you take care of it, it just snaps and that's it. It's busted. This is a nice thin, it's plastic, but it feels very wire-like, very durable. It's still shiny. You can see the shine on it. This thing is very old. It came out in 1983, 82 or 83. The figure is an 83 version. I don't know if this was 82. Look at that. There's the date right on the bottom there. 1982, Hasbro Incorporated. Since I pieced a lot of my collection together, they don't always come complete with their drivers. But I like this wire on it, especially since this thing sometimes falls over. Because of this wire, it is actually kind of difficult to get it to stand sometimes. And as you can see, it's actually very similar to what toys are packed with these days to secure in their plastic trays. It's just a black version of it. But we move this as far away from the M.M.S. as we can at a safe distance. We take our Hawk figure, put his visor down to protect his eyes, and you can set your Hawk up to look like he is operating this console. So you can put his hands on the console, he's operating the buttons and such. And there's really not much more to it than that. I guess another reason why I didn't bother asking for the M.M.S. Now as an adult I can certainly appreciate it a lot more. It is a nice display piece. But as a kid, give me the Vamp, give me the Mobat. Those other vehicles, I didn't have the Vamp or the Mobat. They were a little out of my price range at the time. I did have the Ram. So I wanted something with some speed, something a little more exciting. This is just, it sits there and it shoots missiles. So not the most exciting G.I. Joe vehicle or armament. Very peculiar that the leader would come with this thing. Nothing about this thing says to me leadership. Nothing really conveys authority to me. It's a big missile system, but I don't know why he came with this. I would have said he should have come with the Mobat. That would have made more sense to me, or the Vamp. Or single-carded. That would have made the most sense, a single-carded leader of G.I. Joe, but maybe they thought, well, this is probably the weakest, the least appealing of all of the vehicles and sets we're releasing. We'll stick the leader in with the M.M.S. So this thing does have some posability to it. I've had to glue this thing. It actually has broken pegs inside of it. But it does rotate from side to side. It does a full 360. Mine doesn't anymore, but it used to. As you can see, this console really likes to fall off. And this part also, so it has 2 points of articulation. Spinning around and also aiming up and down. You definitely don't want to be aiming like that, especially when it's hooked up to a vehicle. But you do have a little bit of range in where this thing is pointing, and the missiles are removable to a fault. This thing is incredibly loose. I have added a little bit of just a tiny drop of crazy glue onto there. The trick, if you ever have any loose missiles on your G.I. Joe figures or on your G.I. Joe vehicles or armaments, if they're really loose and keep falling off, this happens with the Jets a lot, the Sky Striker, is I just, some people use nail polish. I like to use crazy glue. I find it works just a little bit better. But just the tiniest dab of crazy glue. And then to get a proper fit, I'll take the missile and put it in for a second, wiggle it, take it out, leave it for an hour, let it dry. And then when I pop it back in, these used to be so loose that I could literally just turn it like that and it would fall off. And just that little bit of crazy glue allows it a little bit more grip. This one's still pretty loose. I could tighten it up a little bit more. But an effective way to tighten your missiles up. And that's the M.M.S. Light on the play features, but it has the charm of the first year G.I. Joe figures and vehicles. It's that OD green, which G.I. Joe moved away from as quickly as 1983. So this has a lot of nostalgia for me, even though I didn't own it. It's got that color scheme that I love from the first year Joes. And it is an impressive looking weapon system, too. So that's my look at the G.I. Joe mobile missile system, the M.M.S, with Colonel Hawk, original leader of G.I. Joe. Hope you enjoyed this review. Thanks for watching, and until next time, Nerdmas Day.